Yeah, anyways, I want to thank everybody for coming. Bezat Hashem, we're going to learn about Purim, by the way. And then we're going to go over the mitzvot that we're supposed to do on Purim, not to forget. But before that, actually, there is a Gemara, there's a Talmud. I hope it doesn't seem to be too religious. I hope not. But even if it is, it'll be on the good side. The Gemara actually in Masechta Megillah that talks about Purim, it has a question. It says, what did the Jews do? Yeah. It says, what wrong thing did the Jews do that they deserved to have annihilation at that time? Now, before even we go through the question of the Gemara, the decree that happened during Purim, that Haman made a decree to kill all the Jews, that was probably the worst decree that ever happened in our history. And let's go through it. Why? For example, the first time that we find the first anti-Semite that wanted to kill all the Jews was Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh said, kill all the boys. But he was not interested in the boys. He didn't care to kill the girls. He let the girls stay alive. So he was only after the boys because he didn't want the Jews to rebel against him. And also the Gemara says, even in future generations, we had a Holocaust over 70 years ago, or whatever it was. So it's true that they wanted to destroy all the Jews, but the Gemara says God did a kindness when he spread the Jews all around the world. Although it's very sad, but the fact that we are scattered has a blessing, a silver lining also. Why? So the Talmud says, because if there's persecution against the Jews in a certain country, that doesn't affect the other Jews in the other countries. Not only that, these guys could escape to other countries too, like it happened, during the world wars. And then also the Jews could use their influence from other countries to somehow, bring help to their brothers and sisters. So again, in terms of Pharaoh, he was only after the boys. After we got scattered in exile, thank God there's many countries that don't persecute the Jews. But at that time, the Jews had nowhere to run away to. Achashverosh was a king over 127 countries, basically the whole, inhabited world at that time. And he wanted to kill the Jews all in one day. It wasn't like in every state. They had a different day to, God forbid, slaughter the Jews. So they could run away from one date, to a different state. They couldn't do that. So that's what the Gemara has a question. Usually if such things happen, there must be a punishment. There must be a wrong thing, a sin done, that a punishment comes. There's a very religious statement for that they say, the ones that speak Hebrew, they say, "En onesh belo chet." There is no punishment without a sin. So the Gemara wants to know, what did they do wrong that it deserves such punishment? Who did it ask it from? None other than Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, like a good teacher, puts it on the students. You tell me why they deserve to die. Actually, the commentators have a question. Why is the teacher throwing the question back on the students when the students ask him? So each one has his own way of answering it. So the students say, you know what the reason is? Because they had benefit from the meal, from the banquet that wicked person, the Gemara calls Achashverosh, because of the banquet that he made, and they benefited from it. That's what the students want to answer. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai asked them, okay, who went to the banquet? Only the people of Shushan, the capital. But the Jews in the rest of the country, they didn't come to that banquet, because that banquet that everybody was invited was only in Shushan. So the students had no answer. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says the reason is because they bowed down to an idol, not in times of Achashverosh, but actually when Nebuchadnezzar, I think in English it's called Nebuchadnezzar, forgive my English, it was the king of Babylonia at that time. So he wanted to make sure that the Jews stay in exile for a long time. So he made this huge idol, and he forced all the Jews to bow down to it publicly. Anybody who will hold himself back from bowing down would be killed. So the Jews were afraid to all bow down. Actually, this is brought down in the prophets, and it says that the only people that did not bow down, there were only three: Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These three were colleagues of Daniel, the prophet, and Daniel wasn't there at that time. If he was there, he would also not bow down. So simply learning the Gemara comes out. People in the capital, in Shushan, they were guilty of enjoying the banquet. And the Jews that were outside of Shushan, they were guilty of idol worship. So a very, very open question comes. Honestly, more than one of the commentators ask it. Yes, there is always a consequence for wrong things that we do. But the consequence for, let's say, what did they do wrong for going to a banquet? The worst, they ate non-kosher food? Worst. right? They didn't do anything else. The worst. What?
They enjoyed it.
Oh, right. And so they enjoyed non-kosher food.
Well, yeah, I mean, just that's a whole language. They enjoyed the event. And
No, I understand. So they asked. So if you enjoy eating non-kosher food, you deserve to die. Not only that, women, children, under bar mitzvah, it doesn't make sense. That's a question that they have. So each of the commentators come with an answer. We're going to go through three of them. And I think really the last one is very relevant in our days, that we really see it. But let's go through the traditional answers. Our rabbis from 400 years ago, 300 years ago, they're all bothered with this question. So each one comes with an answer. So the first one that actually comes with this answer, one of the first ones, there was a rabbi, that is the head of all the Kabbalists from 400 years ago. You have heard the family Pinto, right? They're Kabbalists. So they really, the Abu Chatzeras and the Pintos. So the great grandfather of all the Pintos was a man with the name of Rabbi Yoshiyahu Pinto. He lived, like they call him the Rif, Rabbi Yoshiyahu Pinto. He lived like maybe close to 400 years ago. So he comes with two answers. He says, people of Shushan that also enjoyed the banquet, right? Their parents also worshipped idols in times of Nebuchadnezzar. It's not that they didn't worship idols. But because the Jews were forced, God was tolerant, they're not really at fault. He didn't want to punish them. But now that you go to a banquet and you enjoy it, so that opened up the previous sins too. So it's not that they got punished for enjoying the banquet. No, for that there's no death penalty. But once you go there, you enjoy it. So then God says, look at these people, they go enjoy it. So then it actually opens up the previous wrongdoings too. I had a teacher that used to always bring an example of a guy that runs a red light. The police catches him and they take his license. Then they see he has a bunch of other felonies before too. They only caught him because of the red light. Before that, the government wasn't after him. But once he gets caught because he ran a red light, the whole history comes up and he's going to get punished for everything else too. So that's basically the second answer that Yoshiyahu Pinto brings. His first answer is, if you have any questions, what do we ask? And if it gets boring, let me know. Whenever it gets boring, we say story. Usually stories are not boring. And then he brings the first answer. He says it wasn't that they enjoyed the non-kosher food. You see, there's a history behind it, although we might not be aware of it that much. And that is, why did he make the banquet? So simply learning it, he made the banquet because his kingdom was confirmed after 3 years of fighting wars. He got 127 countries, and he made a party for 180 days for everyone. 6 months of party, half a year. And then he made 7 days for people of Shushan. But the truth is, the Talmud says that wasn't the reason that he made the banquet of the 7 days. There was a much more important reason to him. You see, close to 7 years before this, when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple, so God sent the prophet, Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah. He told the Jews, when you go to exile, buy houses, start planting trees, you're not going to be there for 1 or 2 years. You're going to be there for a long time. So he says, get married, marry your children off. He says those words, and really find spouses for your children. But in 70 years, like as soon as 70 years are over, you will be given permission to come back and build a second temple. The problem was, where do you count the 70 years from? That was not clear. And the Jews went to exile in 3 different stages. The first time when Nebuchadnezzar attacked, he took the scholars, the big ones, into Babel. A few years later, he attacked again, he took more Jews to exile. But the temple wasn't destroyed. So after 11 years of the first conquer that he had, he actually destroyed the temple. So everybody had a question, when does the 70 years start from? And they knew, the prophet can't make a mistake. So where does the 70 years start from? This is my wonderful wife. Not my daughter, I promise. Everybody thinks she's my daughter. I met somebody who said, Rabbi, did you get married second time? I said, why do you say that? He says, you have a young wife. I said, no, it's not a second. That's okay. Biden is not going to see that. So he's not going to raid my house. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So anyways, I forgot where I was. Oh, so then when does the 7 years start from? That was the question. So Nebuchadnezzar that destroyed the temple, he had a grandson with the name of Belshazzar. So Belshazzar thought that the 7 years starts from the first time of conquering. So 7 years went by and the Jews didn't get saved. Now God doesn't lie. So he thought, you know what? Once Jews didn't get saved, God forgot them. They're going to be in exile forever. They're not going to go back. So he made a huge party. And I'm sure you guys know the story of Daniel, that when he made that big party, a hand came from heaven and he wrote some cryptic stuff on the wall. And he couldn't read it. They called Daniel, and Daniel tells him that that night he's going to die. So that's when Cyrus the Great attacks, and he gets killed that night. So now Achashverosh, which is the king of Persia, old Persia, he says, I know when the 70 years start from the second time of conquering. So he made that party for 7 days. And it says he brought different types of golden vessels. So the Talmud says these golden vessels were the vessels of the temple, the first temple. And he was actually using it to party. If you look in the Megillah, when he talks about all the different, what do you call it, tapestries that he put on the wall, right? So it says one of the ones was khur. Khur happens to be like a, I don't know, either perforated, satin, or it might be like white color, very expensive fabrics. But the chet of khur is written big in the Megillah. If you look at the Megillah, they say when you hear it, so the chet is written very big. Why is the chet very big? So our rabbis tell us the numerical value of chet. How much is it, people? Anybody knows? They know 8. How many garments did a high priest wear? Also 8. He actually brought the 8 garments of a high priest that he got it from Babylonia. He put it on that night to say that Jews will not get saved. So he did it to celebrate the exile of the Jews, that the temple will never be rebuilt. So Rabbi Yeshua Pinto says, according to this, we understand why they deserved destruction. Anybody that participated in this party, he was saying that I'm happy that the temple is not going to be rebuilt. That was the problem. So we have the 2 explanations of Yeshua Pinto. One is that actually this awakened the previous sins of the idol worship. They were not getting killed because of enjoying the food or something. That's one thing that he says. And then the second explanation is that it was, yes, for enjoying the banquet, but that enjoyment was very bad. It wasn't for non-kosher food. It was something worse. That they're actually happy that the temple got destroyed. That's the way he explains it. So we're going to go through a third explanation, and that is going to be actually a little bit different. I think it's the most relevant for our generation, honestly, because we have seen it time and time during history. There's actually a medrash. You might think that is a little bit, like anti, people of the world, but we have seen it in our history. The medrash says there are times in history that the Jews are like a lamb amongst 70 wolves. Now, why did they use the language of one lamb in middle of 70 wolves? Because when Noah came out of the ark, so it says he had 70 kids or whatever. So the Jews are one nation and the other 70 are the other nations. So they compared the Jews as a sheep amongst the 70 wolves. Now, what does that mean? God forbid, it's not that every time in history we are like that. There were times in history that everybody wanted to get rid of the Jews. And if everybody wasn't interested to get rid of the Jews, they helped the evil ones. You don't have to go too far, right? During the World War II, I'm saying there were many, many nations that actually did give over the Jews in the hands of Hitler. One of the people that actually refused, God bless his soul, was the king of Morocco, the old king of Morocco. He told Hitler, my Jews you don't touch. They are my Jews, but it was like an exception. So then so in such a situation that everybody is coming to harm the Jews, the question is, how do the Jews survive? A sheep can't survive between 70 wolves. So the language that actually the Gemara uses, the Medrash uses, is that Gadol Haruah, the shepherd is so great, which means God. God is so great that he protects them and he saves them. Now, it might be like, these Jews were a little bit, outdated, they were saying like radical stuff. But the truth is, Mark Twain says something very similar in different words. Mark Twain in the late 1900s, right? Or early 1900s, I don't know exactly. The early 1900s, late 1900s, whatever. I definitely don't know American history.
No, I'm not an expert.
I almost failed government in 12th grade. I hated it. Forgive me. So anyways, he writes down, what makes a country, what makes a nation, I'm sorry. There are three things that makes a nation. One of them is that they share the same country. They have the same language. I don't remember the third one. I have to Google it. I think it says they have the same customs, but I'm not sure. But he says Jews didn't have any of them. In his time, there was no land of Israel. There was no rebirth of land of Israel. So the Jews for almost 1900 years, they were in exile, different countries. They don't even share the same language. Most of us don't even today speak Hebrew. Right? Only the Jews in Israel speak Hebrew. Outside of Israel, so now it's most of the Jews, because most of the Jews do live in Israel now. It used to be the opposite up to a few years ago. But again, not all Jews speak Hebrew. Definitely in times of Mark Twain, majority of Jews did not speak Hebrew. And then our customs are not the same. I asked a kid in Taft, do you like gefilte fish? He was a Persian kid. So it says, no, Rabbi. Yeah, I mean, Ashkenazim love gefilte fish, right? Do you like, what is it called, that harissa? What is that sharp thing? Schuk, do you like schuk? Maybe you do, you look Sephardic, huh? Awesome. Yeah, you asked the Ashkenazim, no schuk, man.
It's too spicy for them.
Too spicy for them. They like sweet ones. My mother-in-law is from Poland. She loves gefilte fish with the jelly of it. I don't even know how she eats it.
It's crazy.
Like, I could only eat gefilte fish because I put so much chorein on it, the horseradish that kills the taste.
I've seen it mentioned on Instagram about how they put like gondi or like some like Ashkenazi like meatball in a pita. And I looked at it, I'm like, what the heck am I looking at?
Your Ashkenazi brothers and sisters, they're wonderful. It's okay.
I'm gonna stick to my mom's cooking.
That's
Sephardi.
That's okay. Or mesabzi. That's it. Yeah. So, anyways, he says Jews don't have anything in common, not the same country. Not only that, they were persecuted for almost 1900 years. And he says the Romans came for 300 years. They ruled over the entire world, right? The Greeks were there for 200 years. Going back to old Persia, the Zoroastrians, whatever, for like a few hundred years, they were like ruling all over the world. Now they're not here. They're assimilated. They're gone. And the Jews not having anything that makes a nation, how did they exist? So it says this is a mystery of our history, something like that. He doesn't have an answer for it. But again, the same thing, really, the Jews existing, according to laws of nature, we should have not been here a long time ago. So Mark Twain didn't have the answer, but the Medrash says the answer is God that protects us. But so basically, our existence is supernatural. That's what the Medrash said. And Mark Twain agreed to that in his words. It's a mystery. It doesn't make sense. Logically, we shouldn't be here. So now, when do we have God's protection, the supernatural protection? As long as we actually depend on his protection. Imagine a Jew comes and says, I don't need God's protection. We have better people to protect us. So if God removes, then God is going to remove his protection. If you don't want it, you won't have it. So if that happens, if you're living at a time that you're surrounded by 70 wolves, there is no way that you're going to exist. That's basically what it is. So now going back in times of Haman, Haman came out to be the prime minister. If you look at the Talmud, says Achashverosh didn't love the Jews that much either. It's not clear in the Megillah, but the way our rabbis learn, he wasn't a Jew lover